In the small hours of a winter night in July 1979, the sky over Western Australia caught fire. Over the wheat towns along the southern coast, people stood in their yards in the dark and watched something enormous break apart. A slow procession of burning fragments, dragging sparks from horizon to horizon, rattling windows with sonic booms. A 17-year-old named Stan Thornton woke up because pieces of it were landing on his roof. What fell on Esperance that night was America's first space station, 77 tons of laboratory, workshop, and living quarters. And here is the part that makes it a post-mortem. Everyone on Earth had known for 2 years that it was coming down. They knew, and they could not stop it. Rewind 6 years. Skylab was the biggest thing anyone had ever put in space, a station built inside the shell of a Saturn rocket stage with a workshop, a solar observatory, and more room inside than a small house. It launched on May 14th, 1973, built from the leftover hardware of the Apollo program. 63 seconds later, it was dying. The launch shook loose the station's meteor shield, and the slipstream tore it away, taking one solar wing with it and jamming the other shut. Skylab reached orbit crippled, starved of power, its insulation gone, the temperature inside climbing toward that of an oven. What happened next is the part worth remembering. In Houston, engineers had 10 days to invent a fix, and part of the answer came from a sewing room. Technicians stitched a giant parasol of nylon and mylar, folded to fit through a scientific airlock the size of a small window. Pete Conrad's crew rode up to a station no one was sure could be saved. Their first day nearly broke them. Paul Weitz stood in the open hatch of the Apollo capsule, hanging into space with a 10-foot shepherd's hook, hauling on the jammed wing while Conrad flew the capsule in formation, and it would not budge. Then the docking failed, and failed again, before the capsule finally caught. The next day they threaded the folded sunshade through the wall and opened it like an umbrella against the sun. The temperature fell. 2 weeks later, Conrad and Joseph Kerwin went outside with cutting tools and, hanging off the hull, pried the jammed solar wing free by brute force. The station came alive. It was the finest repair job in the history of spaceflight, and it taught everyone watching a dangerous lesson that a rescue would always be possible. For the next 9 months, Skylab did everything it was built to do. 3 crews lived aboard, some for nearly 3 months at a stretch, the longest human beings had ever stayed in space. They photographed the sun in wavelengths no one had ever seen, watched a comet swing past, and proved that people could live and work above the Earth. In February of 1974, the last crew powered the station down, locked the hatch, and came home. The plan was simple. Skylab would sleep in orbit for years, and early in the next decade, the brand new space shuttle would fly up, dock a booster to it, and push it higher for a second life. The plan died quietly, killed by 2 curves on 2 charts. The first was the shuttle's schedule, which slipped and slipped again. The rescue vehicle would not fly until 1981. The second curve came from the sun itself. The solar cycle was heading into a fierce maximum, and a hotter sun swells the Earth's upper atmosphere, reaching up like thickening water to drag on anything in low orbit. Skylab began falling years ahead of schedule, and this was no idle hope. NASA went as far as building the rescue hardware, a robotic tug designed to ride up in the shuttle's cargo bay, dock with the old station, and push it to safety. The tug was real. The money was spent. All it needed was the ride. But engineers could compute the crossing point of those 2 curves as early as anyone cared to look. The station would come down before its rescuer ever left the ground. In December of 1978, NASA stopped pretending otherwise and canceled the rescue. What followed was 18 months of the strangest countdown in history, because Skylab's fall was public, global, and impossible to schedule. A Soviet satellite with a nuclear reactor had scattered radioactive debris over Canada the year before, and though Skylab carried nothing radioactive, the world was primed. Newspapers ran daily orbit maps printed beside the weather. Radio stations broke into programming with Skylab bulletins, the way they would for a hurricane. Hotels threw Skylab parties. People wore T-shirts printed with bullseyes and painted targets on their rooftops and their lawns. Bookmakers quoted odds on where 77 tons would land, and a San Francisco newspaper offered $10,000 for the first piece of the station delivered to its office within 72 hours. A bet it considered perfectly safe, since the debris was never going to fall anywhere near California. On July 11, 1979, the station came down whether anyone was ready or not. Skylab had no engines of its own, no way to steer itself home. All the controllers could do was use its spinning flywheels and thrusters to change how it tumbled, nudging the point where the atmosphere would finally grab it. On the last morning, with the predictions drifting toward populated ground, they played their final card, a single command sent on one of the station's last passes over a tracking station to put the old laboratory into a slow tumble and drag the impact zone farther along its path, away from land, out over open water. They aimed the wreck at the empty Indian Ocean, and they nearly made it. The station held together longer than predicted, a calculation off by about 4%. And the tail of the debris footprint stretched past the coastline, scattering molten fragments across the outback around Esperance. No one was hurt. Stan Thornton grabbed charred pieces off his roof, got on a plane with no passport and no suitcase, and collected the $10,000 in San Francisco. The Shire of Esperance, surveying the mess, wrote the United States a ticket, $400 for littering. It was a joke, and everyone knew it, but it took 30 years and a radio station's listeners to finally pay the fine. No one died when Skylab fell, and that is partly why it worked as a warning. Deorbit planning stopped being an afterthought and became a discipline. When Russia retired the Mir station, it was steered into the remotest water on Earth. The station flying today keeps a plan and a vehicle for bringing it down on purpose, and the lesson reached further than stations. This very week, a rescue tug launched from beneath a carrier aircraft, flew to a dying NASA telescope called Swift, and began the mission of boosting it to safety. A robotic tow truck sent up so a $250 million observatory does not repeat the fall. It is almost exactly the mission Skylab waited for. This time it launched. The lesson of Skylab is not that things fall. Everything in low orbit falls, eventually, and the engineers always knew it. The lesson is what happened in the gap between a promise and a capability. The station that proved astronauts could fix anything was lost because for 3 critical years there was no way to reach it, and the numbers announcing that gap were public, printed, and politely ignored until the sky over Australia turned to fire. The sun kept its schedule. The shuttle missed its own. And when a promise and a fact disagree, the fact wins, from orbit, at 7 kilometers a second. The official verdict was scattered across the outback, but the post-mortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.